Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dice Commando YouTube channel. I'm Andrew, with you here as always. This is the Commando Cast, a video cast about all things Star Wars Destiny. This video and others like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. Please show your support with a like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any new videos. If you want to get involved with the channel, consider becoming a channel member. There are many benefits to channel membership, including access to our Discord, exclusive deck tech and strategy videos, and the opportunity to help create channel content. I want to sincerely thank all our channel members, as I truly couldn't do this without your support. You guys rock. Go Commando.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Dice Commando and the Commando Cast. Thanks for joining me, and happy Friday. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about over the last week and a half or so is how much I'm actually surprisingly looking forward to ARH standard rotation, meaning rotation of the convergence block and hopefully transformations along with it, out and playing with just the ARH cards. Now, I'm not saying that I'm excited about playing with just the ARH cards, and we'll talk about kind of some of the assumptions I have that go along with it. But today I want to talk about the pros of that, the cons of that, and really why I think that it's time for ARH to go ahead and trigger that rotation. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for joining me. Hope everything went well for you this week and that you're all prepped and ready to go for the big tournament this weekend if you are deciding to play. As of the time I'm shooting this, I still haven't decided whether or not I'm going to subject myself to that sort of a beatdown in a competitive tournament, but I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of fun this weekend for people to have. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, I actually want to address kind of the elephants in the room. And I don't mean so much in terms of I hate rotation and stuff like that. That's not really what I mean. But I'm going off of today's conversations based off of two assumptions that I hold. The first of which will be that I'm assuming that upon any sort of rotation trigger for ARH standard, that the team will go back and declare some sort of subset legality, right? Let's be very clear, they won't reprint FFG cards, right? They've already said that. So what that means is that the assumption that I have, and I think most people have, is that what they'll do is they'll declare some sort of FFG legal subset, right? The example I use all the time is like field medic, right? There's no point in them calling it a field medical technician, right? They'll just say, they won't reprint it, but they'll say, field medic is legal, right? They'll say 50, 100 cards, something like that. That is my assumption that will happen. So I am working off of that assumption as we talk about that today. So please keep that in mind. The second assumption here is that in terms of timing of this, ARH 3 we know, which is the Mandalorian set, and the fact that they're calling it ARH 3 is significant, right? But ARH 3 is already in development, which means that, right, for me to say it's time for them to trigger rotation, I'm not really saying that they would trigger it like today or tomorrow or even on the release of ARH 3, right? So I just want to keep that in perspective for, to put everything in context, right? They already have that in development. They're already testing it. Every assumption would be that they're testing it along with the existing card pool, including convergence, right? So any rotation discussions would really be, after that, which would be ARH 4 would be the assumption, right? So please keep those two things in mind kind of as we go really through the conversation today, right? That I assume that there will be an additional set or some subset of FFG cards added, which will increase the card pool size, and that the rotation would happen in likely one more set, right? So anyway, just want to get those cleared up. So there are obvious pros and cons, right? Let's go ahead and kind of hit the big, I think, con, which would be the reason that people would say, no, it's not time to rotate, right? The big concern is number of cards in pool, right? Well, the ARH sets are smaller, so there's not as many cards available for us to play with. And that is true and false at the same time. And of course, like I said, with the assumption that there would be some sort of, subset of FFG cards injected into it, that would of course bolster the card pool. But even with that aside, the reason why I think the fact that the ARH sets are smaller so that they could go, 4 or 5 sets without rotating. The reason I think that is not relevant is because if we look at the quality of the average card, there are, with the exception of, cards like Discord, which I think probably started out good and ended up somewhere else, right? But, with the exception of, a handful of cards, the majority of the ARH cards within the sets are playable. I mean, quote unquote playable, right? There's far less chaff. They have a much higher quality of card than the FFG sets did. So while in terms of sheer numbers of looking at an Excel sheet or looking at it on the DB, well, in terms of sheer numbers, 3 ARH sets, or at least based on the 2 and extrapolating to 3, the 3 ARH sets that would come out to form their block are going to have less total number of cards. But my claim is that overall, in terms of quality of actual cards that see play, I think it's probably equivalent, if not more. I don't know. That would be really hard to measure because you do need to keep in mind that let's be very clear, right? Convergence has been out for 2 years, right? March 28th, as of the day I'm shooting this, it's been out for greater than 2 years. We've been playing these sets for a long time, so a lot more cards have entered the metas than I think would have normally, just out of sheer boredom and the other changes that we saw, right? So I think if you put it in perspective of, a normal release cadence like we're getting with ARH, I don't think that there's fundamentally a big difference in the number of I don't think there's a big difference practically in the number of cards that are realistically playable in the meta. And sure, it may be slightly less, but I think, again, from a functional standpoint, that you're roughly in the same space. So I'm not worried about the fact that, let's say an FFG set was roughly 150 cards. That would be 450 cards. I'm not worried about the fact that, 3 100-card ARH sets are only 300 cards. I'm not worried about that because I think that from a functional standpoint, we would be roughly where we were anyway. So I think that's the big argument from a, practical standpoint against rotation. The other argument against rotation, I think, is, well, I want my FFG stuff to be legal. But then, to be honest, you're probably not part of this conversation. You may be part of the conversation, but you probably already had your mind made up anyway. And we have to accept that. At some point, we know that at some point down the line, we're going to trigger rotation. So the question is just a matter of when, right? So that's why I'm saying I think that part of it is not completely relevant. And again, working off that assumption that they will have some sort of FFG legal subset. And that's not just my assumption. There have been, I don't know that actually, to be fair, I don't know that it's been said in an official stance, but there have been people that have said on the ARH Discords and stuff that they always intend to have FFG real cards be a part of the game. So that's more than an assumption, actually, right? But again, the assumption would be that it would come at the same time as rotation, which I can't promise you because I'm not involved in that activity. So I think that addresses, honestly, the major cons to triggering rotation. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and the matter of when is, well, there's not enough cards. And like I said, I think that's handled. The pros to triggering rotation are, I kind of already said it, right? But the pros to rotation is we have had convergence forever now. 2 years is a long. So I'll put up the dates, right? So convergence was March 28th, 2019. Spark of Hope, the droids, was July 6th, 2019. And Covert Missions was March 6th, 2020. And that's with an asterisk because we got the full set release late, or we got the full set published, I should say, not released. We got the full set published, and then some people even had it in hand as early as late January, right? So we're a year and change for Covert Missions, even from the release date. We are a year and a half on Spark of Hope, and we're 2 years on Convergence, right? So that's the pro there is let's shake it up. The other big pro there is I'm working off of the assumption that because I don't know this for a fact, right? But I'm working off of the assumption that transformations has to be considered part of the convergence block. I mean, obviously FFG never actually said that. I don't believe FFG actually ever said that, but I don't see how we wouldn't rotate it at the same time as convergence block. So we have that going for us in terms of just changing it up, but specifically why I've been thinking about it recently is like there are some cards in Convergence that frankly I'm just tired of, but also I think that there would be an advantage to ARH to rotate them because they're somewhat design limiting. And the first one that comes to mind is Admiral, and to a lesser extent you are in Command, but primarily Admiral, right? Admiral is something that's really, it's always been, I mean, it's great value. It's, supposed to be this big, expensive 4-cost upgrade with the reset, but, where we're at with resources, it's not that hard to trigger it. And I really feel that it's design limiting to ARH in terms of really what they can do with bigs or, even like a Jarkai, right? Like if you, and I'm not saying that it's keeping Jarkai out, right? But a Jarkai deck where you're looking at a multiple upgrade deck combined with something that allows you to reset your characters. And again, I'm not saying Admiral necessarily is the target of like an NPE or anything like that. I mean, you can if you play smartly, you can control the dice most of the time. You can disrupt them sometimes. So it's not necessarily my argument from an NPE standpoint. It's that Admiral has basically become the flagship or the poster child, the better way to say it. Admiral's really become the poster child for resets. And I think we've seen that, resets can be very design limiting. I mean, especially with, the Jarkai was a good example. The custom Bandolier deck never really did much of a reset, but I mean, fundamentally could have, right? So anything where you're trying to get more than your standard 5 dice on a character, meaning they're 2 elite and they're 3 upgrade. Anything where you're trying to do that, hell, even when you are doing that, resets can be significantly impactful in this game. So that's really where I'm coming from that argument. The next card that I think has been exceedingly design limiting and will continue to be so in probably more ways than I can accurately say in this video is Mean Streets. This battlefield basically hampers yellow, but it does, because the thing is, it doesn't even hamper yellow events, right? But remember, you have to have a scoundrel to put the thing on. And actually, I guess Red Chewie's a scoundrel now, right? But I think you pick up what I'm laying down here, right? In terms of impactful 3-drop events, it really limits them on how they can do that, and it really changes the cost curve on a lot of those events. So triggering rotation on Mean Streets, I think, can open up a lot of more options for events or maybe even some interesting character interactions. It's just that, the existence of Mean Street, like I said, I think it's hamstringing a lot of their design, right? I mean, let's think about it functionally, right? If Mean Streets hadn't been a card when Dash came out, would Han Dash have been as scary? Maybe not, right? Because that's how we were all functionally thinking about it, is, oh, well, I can jump for 2. I mean, that's really where all of our heads went, right? So now if you're like, okay, jump I actually have to pay for in some fashion. And yes, I get jump rotates out too, right? But my point is they have to consider any sort of, with Mean Streets, they can't really do round enders that are playable by hero. They can't do round enders. They have to look at every big event and so on. The next thing I'm really excited to have rotate out is the Eject Merchant Freighter combo. When I talked about this kind of in the piloting episode a couple weeks back, and playing around with maybe restricting those two. And again, I don't think it's necessary, but it's an interesting concept. It's just the pure value for basically no payment out of the Eject Merchant Freighter combo has without a doubt impacted our meta. I mean, you're playing cards like Darth Vader and stuff and ejecting him just because it's value, not because you're playing a piloting deck, right? So I'm excited for those to rotate out and see kind of where we can get back to in terms of, kind of middle or whatever it may be. The next is transformations as a whole, right? And again, I'm working off this assumption that transformations would rotate out with convergence. I don't know how else we'd do it, so you have to kind of assume that, I would think. And primarily the big poster child for that is Han, right? Han is he's not design restricting in the sense of I can't create other things, but he's design restricting in terms of any 1013 yellow character has to be better than Han. And if you make him better than Han, it's probably like looking at it's almost being busted, right? So that's why, Han specifically to rotate out, I could go either way on Anakin. I mean, he's always been pretty good. But I don't know. I think they did a really good job applying kind of the Anakin mechanic when you look at Kylo, right? Redemption Kylo, I think they did a really good job with him. I think probably Anakin could go, but, like I said, I can go either way on that. I'm not putting a flag in the sand saying, he's a bad thing. But it would be really nice to have more options and more design options available and more space to go with than always just looking at if I have 13 points, I should run Han, right? And then I put out feelers on the DC Discord and said, what are some other cards you guys are thinking about that are design limiting? And, it was a good discussion. Some of the stuff that came up were, Palpatine in general. And I think that's probably more of just a fatigue thing, but it's a good point in that, Palpatine does, it's not necessarily that he restricts design of abilities, but if you're going to create a one-drop blue ability for whatever reason, you really have to think hard about that in terms of with Palp being around. Or heck, a one-drop, now that Palp can run Rainbow, you have to think about a one-drop ability in general for Palpatine. And I think it's a completely reasonable argument. Palpatine's done a lot of good for people over the years. But, people have really enjoyed playing him in various ways. And I think we've all played him at one point or the other if we have him. But I can see the argument that he is kind of restricting design space on one-drop blue abilities. It's completely valid. And then the last one I have today is Diceless Characters. You guys know where I stand on the concept of Diceless Characters in general. I think that they were kind of a design mistake in that, and the poster child for this that I'll put up is Hoth Trooper, right? And the reason he's the poster child and not the Ewok is because what Hoth Trooper really did is, for 5 points, enabled a color. And I think that's where the design mistake was. I'm not saying that Diceless Characters were broken. I'm not saying that Diceless Characters really, shouldn't have been. It's just that the ability for a cheap character to enable color and do things in this game, this is a game based on rolling dice and controlling those dice and stuff like that, which is why people always disliked action cheating and stuff. And bringing cards that don't have to roll dice always kind of is a questionable activity. And when now you're bringing cards that don't have to roll dice and they can enable you to bring a completely different color to the table for very low points, I think that's a problem. So again, I'm not saying that Hoth True, now that Ewoks has kind of lost a lot of their tools for previous rotation, I'm not saying that Hoth Trooper is a bad thing. But just the concept of having access to a color for such a cheap value, I think it's a good time for that we'll lose the Diceless Characters, and I think that'll be a big advantage from rotation as well. So, that's running down the so we did the cons, we did the pros. The biggest pro of all is that we get change, right? To be fair, we get change every time a new ARH set is dropped, granted. But it's always change within the context of what we've had for 2 years. So, from an ARH standpoint, I'm really looking forward to rotation. I hope that, when they start design for ARH4, or if they already are in the design for that, that's really done with... Because obviously when you go into design, you have to know what your card pool is going to be. So I hope that they're having those conversations over there that, after AH3, let's pull the trigger and let's get this done. And then there's, because, again, working off of the assumption that we're going to have an FFG card pool, somebody's got to do that work too, right? So there's a lot of work, and meaning going through and identifying what those cards are going to be. And that has to happen before they even go in design of the first set that's going to hit post-rotation. So there's a lot of work to be done on that side for ARH, and maybe I'm sure that they're already talking about it. but having a conversation that, it's time to start thinking about rotation because of the reasons I just mentioned, I think is completely valid. So anyway, let me know what you guys are thinking. I mean, has Convergence being out for 2 years and a part of the game mean that like we don't want to let it go? I mean, that's completely valid as well. So let me know what you guys are thinking. Thanks again for joining me today, folks. Nothing else. Go Commando.